Stay on.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the College Football Cut. I am your host, Adam Mack, here joined alongside my amazing co-host, Mr. Jerred. Jerred, how you doing today, buddy?
I'm better now, Adam. How are you?
I'm always good, man.
Yeah.
We have a fun episode planned for you today. We'll break down all the different stuff in college football to go on this weekend that happened last weekend. We will have a special guest joining us on the show a little bit later. We're just waiting for him to hop on. We'll talk a little bit about him later, but just to start, what are your thoughts from college football from this past weekend?
This past week was pretty wild. I mean, in football in general. Of course, it started off with college football on Saturday. There was, I think, 6 upsets, depending upon your definition of what an upset exactly is. But There was a couple big dogs that went down. And then it carried over into Sunday, too. There's some weird games in the NFL. So, it's just solidified how unpredictable football can be in general, especially college football.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, we were talking all year long about the Big Ten. And I don't know if they're crumbling, but it's like we're, I guess, now seeing, who like the contenders are and who are, the pretenders in the conference. We were talking about the beginning of the year, it was all Penn State, Iowa were absolutely killing it. And now these two teams aren't even in the conversation anymore.
Right.
So, it's crazy to think about that. And even that you thought, Michigan State's going to be that sleeper team.
Mm-hmm.
They met Purdue. And so it was a crazy week, but, there's teams still sitting at the top of college football right now. Yeah,
man, Purdue, just a giant killer this year. They took down Iowa earlier, right? And then now they took down Michigan State. It's crazy.
They got a big game this week against Ohio State. So,
man,
I wonder if they go for the three-peat right now.
Yeah, I mean, if you beat all the good teams, you're supposed to be the best team, right? It doesn't matter your other losses, right?
I mean, you can make the argument right now that Purdue has more quality wins than
just about anybody.
Alabama.
Yeah. Oh, it's crazy stuff.
Yeah, but so before our guest hops on, we're just waiting on him for a little bit. We'll obviously introduce him whenever he gets on, but we'll go over a little bit of the playoff rankings. Not much change. Obviously at the top, we obviously Georgia. They're the clear number 1 team in the country. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, number 2, still a lot of question marks with Alabama, but then kind of expected Oregon at 3, and then Ohio State at 4, followed by first 2 out of Cincinnati and the school up north. But
right,
what are your first thoughts on on those 2?
So, Cincinnati, well, they got to bump up 1. Michigan State fell 4 spots, and all 4 behind them all bumped up 1. So there wasn't too much creativity that happened there. Last week, one point that I was mentioning was it seemed that the committee was favoring the head-to-head matchups, and that seemed super evident with the Oregon and Ohio State rankings. That still stays there, but now we're kind of off of that now, and Michigan is 6, and Michigan State fell to 7. They don't care about the head-to-head matchup there. That loss to Michigan State against Purdue was enough to make them drop. Wake Forest, that one kind of broke my heart, man.
I know that was a tough loss. Not one I was actually expecting. Even the Michigan State game, I wasn't expecting. I was surprised that was as much as they dropped.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think UNC, they might be on a warpath the rest of the year. It's not going to mean a whole lot, but I mean
they're not. They're losing 23-7 right now, and Kenny Pickett is trouncing UNC right now.
Oh, I didn't even know that was going on right now. I apologize. So
Mac Brown does not look happy.
I bet not.
Yeah, again, I've been saying all year, Kenny Pickett is quarterback one of this team, of this draft, and he's showing it right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. He's fun to watch. It's it's kind of one of those deals where you wonder if maybe he was at a bigger school or if Pitt was having a bit of a better season, how much more recognition exactly he would be getting. But he's a quality football player. He's fun to watch.
Oh, absolutely. He's one of those guys, going into this year, we were all talking about the same three people, Sam Howell, Spencer Rattler, Carson Strong kind of was, the three that we were talking about, and he kind of just slid under the radar a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But, right now, Kenny Pickett is, for my opinion, making, headways for me.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I'm excited. But perfect timing because I'm ready to talk. We have actually a very special guest, someone that I've been looking forward. As soon as he agreed to come on the show, someone I'm very excited to speak with. If you're a fan of the show, you know I'm a proud Marshall alumni. I got my master's there last year. This week is a big week for Marshall. Not only do we have a rematch of the Conference USA Championship game from last season that I hope we avenge last year's loss, but this is also the big anniversary week. The 51st anniversary of the plane crash is this Sunday, and we have a very special guest. He is the sports director from WSAZ in Huntington, West Virginia. Covers all Huntington, West Virginia sports, so therefore all Marshall athletics. Mr. Keith Morehouse. Keith, how you doing tonight?
Well, I'm good, Adam. Thanks, man. How are you guys?
Oh, I'm doing great.
Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me. No problem at all.
Oh man, this is exciting. Obviously, I'm a proud Marshall alum. I understand the significance of this week. Jerred, you probably don't understand other than my constant, love for Marshall and how much I hype them up every week. But this week is very special in the community of Huntington. And honestly, the state of West Virginia. For people who don't know, on November 14th, 1970, Southern Airways Flight 932, on a flight back from a game against East Carolina, carrying the Marshall football team, crashed, and all 75 individuals on board did not make it. And to this day, Marshall still, every year on this week, honors them and for their, for that year. So, Keith, you actually have a special connection to that day. Would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, when this was back in 1970, as you mentioned, so it's 51 years. But my dad was the play-by-play broadcaster on the radio for Marshall football and basketball, and he did the game at East Carolina that night and was one of the 75 that didn't make it back. Ended up getting married to a girl whose parents were on the crash. Her father was Dr. Ray Hagley, who was the team physician, and her mom, Shirley, was also on the plane. I didn't meet her till later, obviously, but, it stretched far and wide, Adam and Jerred, as you guys would know, throughout the community, just 37 football players. There were doctors and lawyers and lawmakers and city leaders and, moms and dads and husbands and wives and sons and daughters, and it was a devastating tragedy, still the worst sports-related tragedy in American history, and it kind of really shaped what Marshall has become. They had to rally the next year and bring football back when many people thought it was not a good idea. It was too soon. Mm-hmm. Couldn't field a team because back then freshmen couldn't play, and then Marshall got a ruling from the NCAA that allowed freshmen to play, which allowed them to play in 1971. And, from that time on all the way up to now, that's they've continued to honor those people that we lost. And every year there's a memorial. It'll be on Sunday after the game on Saturday on November 14th, where they turn the fountain off in the middle of campus and turn it back on in the spring. So it's, just the symbolic nature of the event, the scope of the tragedy and the story of Marshall afterwards continues to ring across the country, and not just a football story, but it's a story about humanity and coming back from adversity and all those things that we're taught, growing up. And Marshall sort of embodies that every year when this weekend approaches.
Absolutely. You kind of touched on it a little bit, but I remember when I first got to Marshall, I was talking to one of my buddies, and he always had a quote that Doc Holliday said, the old coach at Marshall, and it was, there's not a school or not a football team in the country that means more to a school and to a town than Marshall. And I didn't know much of that until I actually was able to experience it. But, you also kind of touched on, the aftermath, and that obviously everyone knows the movie We Are Marshall and focuses a lot on the aftermath. But what was, that 1971, 1972, that kind of time frame, what was the vibe around, Huntington and around campus for Marshall football?
Yeah, that's a great question. It really, to me, I just remember it almost like it was a sad time because they weren't having winning seasons. They were nowhere near the success that they are now. They were supposed to be good with the team that we lost that year in 1970. But anyway, they bring back the young freshman team and a bunch of walk-ons and guys who had no business playing Division I football, and somehow they won 2 games that year. And that Xavier game, of course, in 1971, first home game after the plane crash, they went on the last play of the game, and it was like storybook stuff, and that kind of kept the program going. But all through the decade of the 70s, I mean, they just weren't winning. It was almost like, man, this program can't get off the ground. It's that tragedy was so tough, and they couldn't get going. The facilities weren't very good. And then in the mid-'80s, they had a winning season, and that sort of dovetailed with some really good coaches that, Stan Parrish and George Chomp and Jim Donnan, who would later coach at Georgia. And then after Jim Donnan, Bob Pruitt gets there, and that's when you see the confluence of Randy Moss and Chad Pennington and Byron Leftwich and all those years where when I was doing the TV games, it was, the golden age of Marshall football. So just the trajectory of the program from that day climbed and still is going up. And again, it's just it's one of the great comeback stories in all of sports. And I say that with a little bit of a stilted opinion, but I think that's true. I just feel like, as Chad Pennington always says, nobody's got this story. And we hope it never happens again in the history of collegiate athletics. But it is a part of Marshall. It's a fabric of the university. And so the school has embraced it, which I think we're all appreciative of. A lot of people said, hey, when are you guys going to let that go and, put it in the rear view? But having that memorial every year and, Doc Holliday started the 75 helmet tradition, the game closest to the 14th, and Coach Huff has picked it up and wants to run with it. So we're forever indebted to all the people that have kept all those folks' memories alive.
So you had left Huntington for a while, and I believe you came back in 96, 97. Marshall won the Division I AA National Championship in 96, correct? And then 97 was also a big year, first year in FBS, and then of course Chad Pennington and Randy Moss were both playing that year.
Yeah.
What was it like being at those games, being in that community when coming off of that national championship and then having 2 electric players like that there?
Yeah, well, they had already generated a lot of excitement. They had won the 1AA championship in 1992, now FCS, with a really good quarterback, and that was Jim Donnan. And then Jim Donnan left in 95, and Bob Pruitt got the job, and he was a former player at Marshall, and that was sort of his dream job. But I had stayed in Huntington and was working in TV, but in 96, I got the call from WSAZ, and ESPN, hey, would you like to do the football and basketball games on TV? And I went, are you kidding me? Yeah. I mean, somebody's playing a joke on me, right? And so the first year I started was 1996, Pruitt's first year, and that was the first year of Randy Moss. And, they went 15-0. Yeah, I mean, really, and they had Eric Kresser, a quarterback who ended up in the NFL. He was with the Bengals for a little bit, had a big arm. He was a transfer from Florida. And they had some other transfers because the reason Moss decided to come in 96 was, he had his trouble at Florida State. After Notre Dame, he had his trouble at Florida State. Bobby Bowden said, I can't keep you here. And so Moss was trying to think, where can I go where I can play right away? Back then, you could play right away if you transferred from Division I to Division I AA. So he knew Marshall was 1AA, it's his home state. And the next year, he knew they were moving up to Division I FBS. So he was only going to stay 2 years anyway.
Mhm.
So in 2 years, he's got 54 touchdowns and he lit up the nation. And that was the start of that era. And it was like, how can they get any better? And then, as you guys mentioned, Chad Pennington joined him in 97. And then in 99, they go 13-0. They beat Clemson at the Death Valley, the opening game, and end up ranked 10th in the country. It was a phenomenal ride. And it's one of those things, guys, when you're in it, you don't realize it. And then you look back and you say, man, oh, man, that's probably – and this is no slight against any current teams or programs, but it might not ever have another run like that. It was that fun. I did 54 games on TV, and Marshall won 50 of them. I counted them one day. So that's what they were doing back then. It was out of this world the way things kind of came together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. It's so crazy to think that a player like Randy Moss attended Marshall. I was talking to some of my buddies that I went to college with in Cleveland, and one of them obviously doesn't pay attention to Marshall and said, no good players ever come out of Marshall. And I said, name your Mount Rushmore of wide receivers of all time. And the first name he brought up was Randy Moss. I said, stop right there. Look up what college he went to. So, that was a fun moment.
It was, and I covered him in high school, and it was crazy. We send the camera to a high school game, and you shoot the whole play. And we would seriously tell our photographer, just ISO on Moss, because he's going to get it 7 or 8 times, and he's going to go to the house 5 or 6. And it was true. And that's the way we shot highlights of his games. And then, of course, he went to Marshall. And always the criticism of him was, oh, well, he played at high school in West Virginia. That's not the highest level. Mm-hmm. And then he dominated there. And then he played, and then they go, oh, he played 1AA. He won't do that the next level. Then they go up to Division I, FBS. He does it there. And people going, oh, that's the MAC. And I said, he's going to do this against anybody he ever sees. And look what he did in the NFL. He changed what a wide receiver deep threat was in the NFL, and probably the greatest ever at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. It's amazing to think about. I was like watching NFL countdown every Sunday, and they have his locker room. He has a little Marshall helmet up in the right-hand corner. Always make a point to that. But another kind of thing we touched on a little bit earlier, kind of going back to the plane crash, and involved your father was on the crash. Obviously, my condolences to you for that. But you had the opportunity to kind of follow in your dad's footsteps and become a sports reporter. And you mentioned, it was a once in a lifetime opportunity when ESPN called. I think everybody in the world would love that call, but it obviously meant more to you since you had the opportunity to cover the team that your dad did. What does that mean to you?
To put it, Adam, in so many words nowadays, I mean, it was a once in a lifetime opportunity that I never took for granted. And I did jump at it. And Coach Pruitt had some things to do with me getting that opportunity. We had a great friend here in Huntington that worked at ESPN Regional, and he would later become pretty high up in ESPN's, TV segment. And he would hire talent and producers, and I mean, really a big executive there. And he kind of started Marshall's TV package. And back then, a lot of schools Marshall's size, they weren't on television, but every one of Marshall's games, were, even before 96. And so, to have the chance, because I tell people that, Dad was only 48 when he died. I never thought he got to finish the job. His life was taken too soon, as were all those 74 folks. And I just felt like to have the chance to get back in there and to be able to do what he did at the same school and with the circumstances was a once in a lifetime opportunity. And I am forever grateful for it. It's brought me great success. I've still stayed here and, raised a family here. And it's been a phenomenal ride at a school that, really embraced me. And I feel very fortunate for that.
So last year was the 50th anniversary of the crash, and Keith, you made a pretty awesome documentary. I haven't finished watching it yet, but I've been able to go through the first half of it, where, of course, you talk about that incident, and then you talk about the Marshall football program quite a bit, and then you also talk about other people that were related to the program, related to the accident. I know early in the film you interview even some of the ECU players who Marshall was playing against that night. Could you talk about that film a little bit? And then also you won a pretty nice award with that film too. Could you talk about that too?
Well, I won't talk too long about that, but it was called A Change of Seasons 50 Novembers ago. And when we knew the 50th anniversary was coming up, I talked to my bosses and said, hey, I'd like to put a special together if you guys are on board. Remember, this is in the middle of COVID. So, traveling was a little dicey, but they were behind me all the way. And so I started thinking about what parts of the story do we tell that haven't already been told. And one of the first things I thought about was, man, what about, actually my wife gave me the idea. She said, what about those players that lined up against Marshall's players in 1970 for East Carolina? What happened to them? What did they think about it? And so I got in touch with 3 of the guys who played that you saw in the documentary, and they, basically poured their hearts out, but said, this has had an effect on them their whole lives. You bash each other's heads into each other, and you play a hard fought game. 17-14 was the final. And then that team walks off and you go out and celebrate. And then the other team, Marshall, doesn't make it home. I mean, that would definitely resonate with you forever. So that was part of it. I did a piece on Chad Pennington, who, he's one of Marshall's favorite sons and coaching over in Lexington now, coaching his son in high school, and his son has signed to play at Marshall. This is coming full circle, guys. This is crazy.
It really is.
Yeah. So did that. And Red Dawson, of course, was not on the plane. He was recruiting, was an assistant coach. And he's in the piece because he called the winning play in that Xavier game the next year. And he's still revered in Huntington. He's still here. Jack Lengyel was the coach immediately after the crash, who came from Ohio. Matthew McConaughey played him in the movie. And, he came down and took over a job. And I asked him this before we talked on that program. I said, you had to talk to some of your coaching buddies. He knew Bo Schembechler and Woody Hayes and those guys because of his Big Ten connections. I said, surely they told you, do not take that job, because it's impossible, right? And he said, I really didn't ask anybody. He goes, I just felt like I've had an opportunity to be a coach. I'm going to go down there and see if I can help that program out. So for him to take that job for those 4 years, win 9 games, go through all that heartache and anguish, but to keep that program alive, I mean, that's one of the most phenomenal gestures of a coach that I know of. So we did that. There's a segment, if you haven't seen the rest of it, where we actually synced up my dad's radio call of the game at East Carolina with the game film, and that's never been done before. So, all these names that we've read on monuments and highlights that you've seen without sound, now you put them all together and you see Joe Hood, and you see the quarterback Teddy Shoebridge, and you hear the game call, and that's pretty eerie to listen to. But I mean, it was really impactful. And so, we just a couple of weeks ago, we found out we won an Emmy for it and a Murrow Award for documentary work. So had so much help, though. It wasn't just me, guys. It was the station was behind me, and we went to, like I said, Lexington, Annapolis, Greenville, Columbus, traveled all over where we needed to go to try to tell the story. I thought it was a once in a lifetime opportunity to do it. And so that's why we put so much emphasis on it.
Absolutely. Well, hey, congrats to you and the station and everybody that agreed to take part. It's quite the film. I'm enjoying it quite a bit.
Well, thanks. It was again, you got one shot at that, and I didn't want to screw it up. So we put our heart and soul into it, if you can put it that way.
Yeah,
absolutely. I remember I was at the game, last year's game, 50th anniversary game. And I remember I actually walked by the fountain ceremony and saw the 3 East Carolina players. And I just remember that was such a crazy moment, because people don't realize the effect it can have on them. And even East Carolina, that the rivalry between those two, I wouldn't even call it a rivalry, but the bond between Marshall and East Carolina now. And I was actually at the Navy game this year, and I actually had an opportunity to meet Jack Lengyel, and like you kind of say, he's such a down-to-earth guy. He was so willing to meet with fans. Even the Navy athletic director was like, "Hey, you got more stuff you have to do over here," and he wasn't done shaking people's hands. So he was such a down-to-earth guy. And even though his legacy at Marshall is endless, and it's incredible. But kind of wanted to transition a little bit from, the past, but kind of into the present of Marshall and the current head coach and state of Marshall. Going into the last year, phenomenal year. I think 16th, 15th in the country at one point. Kind of struggled towards the end. New head coach this year, Charles Huff. What are your thoughts on Coach Huff and just the current state of Marshall football?
Well, I think he came into a situation where, the program had a pretty good year last year. Like you said, a little tail off there at the end. But this guy has been all over Alabama. He helped win a national championship there. And, he asked Nick Saban, this is how smart Saban is. He asked Saban about taking the job. And he said, Saban, just in that mind of his that has all those all that knowledge. He goes, "What do you think about the job?" He said, "Well," he said, "I think it's a great job, but if you take it, be prepared to work up there for 15 years because coaches don't leave." And so he had looked into the program and seen that, Jim Donnan stayed for 6 years and Coach Pruitt for 9 and Doc for 10 years. So he came in, hit the ground running. He was at every coffee shop downtown meeting people, him and his wife and his son, and they've been all over. And he's embraced this game too. This is a daunting game, guys, as you know. I used to ask Doc, I said, "How do you get your guys to play that hard and channel their emotions and feel like you can't lose that game?" And he felt like that. He said, "That's a game you can't lose." And so Coach Huff didn't have to continue this, but this summer he took the whole team up to the cemetery. And I was fortunate enough to speak to the team, as were Red Dawson and Rick Mexstroth, the guy who played in '71, and several other players. He wanted to continue. He said, "That's one thing I want." He goes, "I can't coach this program unless I know the history of this program." So he wanted to keep all the things in check and in motion. And even this week, he told us in his news conference, he's going to go up to the actual crash site. He wants to see where it happened. And then he'll be at the ceremony on Sunday. And so he knows the the enormity of the task this week. Get the guys locked in, do all the coaches are so how they are, laser focused on game week schedule. This never changes. Well, this week it changes. So, but the players know it. He knows it. He said he leaned on some of his older players to help him through this, and then they'll be at the ceremony on Sunday. So and then in between all that, they've got a really tough game with a good football team at UAB. So I think he's been phenomenal. They had a couple of games they maybe should have won that they lost early on, but they're 6-3, tied for the lead in the East at 4-1 with a chance to really make a good move Saturday. So for a first-year head coach, I think he's done really, really well and ingratiated himself to Marshall, state of West Virginia, and the whole community.
So new head coach this year. I believe Marshall just hired a new president for the university, right? And they announced they're going to be changing conferences. So there's a lot going on with the football program and the university as a whole. So what do you see as the future for Marshall football with those transitions?
I like Jerred. I like the move to the Sun Belt, and this is not to denigrate Conference USA, but 6 teams had already decided they were leaving for the American. A lot of those teams, you can't have your league decimated and then wait around and see what happens, because now you see Conference USA has added some teams that, quite frankly, the reason Marshall wanted to get in the Sun Belt was a little more of a regional feel to it. Conference USA is spread out all over the map. I mean, now FIU in Miami is going to travel to New Mexico State, which is 2,000 miles across the country, because they're in the same league. And Marshall wanted to kind of align themselves more regionally with, a league that I think is a very forward-thinking league, the Sun Belt. They've done a great job with, they've got Coastal, they've got some really good football programs, and now they're going to add James Madison, Old Dominion, Marshall, and Southern Miss, and so that compacts the league a little bit, and really I think gives Marshall a footprint down south, which, if you think about it, so many of their alumni are down there anyway. So they're going to go to Atlanta and watch them play Georgia State, or they're going to go to Myrtle Beach and watch them play Coastal. So the fans have an opportunity to be down there where that action is, and I think it was a move they needed to make. And now, as you look at Conference USA, they're trying to put the pieces back together. And Western Kentucky and Middle Tennessee were both thinking about going to the MAC, and now that's not going to happen. So I don't know if they feel stuck, but it was good that I think Marshall was proactive instead of waiting around and see where the chips fell, and then figured out, hey, all right, what conference is going to be best for Marshall. So I think they made the move for those reasons.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's exciting. I remember, just scrolling through Twitter every day and everyone just waiting for Marshall to make that announcement that they're moving to the Sun Belt, which they nicknamed the Fun Belt at this point.
Right.
So, as a Marshall fan, I'm super excited. The thing 5 months ago when Oklahoma and Texas announced they were leaving the Big 12 in favor of the SEC, that 5 months later we'd be talking about Conference USA and them struggling to replace pretty much the top tier of the conference. It's crazy to think that those two teams played such a big influence college football in general and that Marshall was found a way to be affected by it.
It's funny you say that. Someone I'd seen a quote. I think Old Dominion AD had asked Keith Gillis, the commissioner of the Sun Belt. They said, "When did you start thinking about this next round of realignment?" He said, "The day Texas and Oklahoma decided to go to the SEC." He knew the dominoes were going to fall, so they were going to be, all right, we're going to go out and get who we want as opposed to waiting. Yeah, so you're right. That shook up the whole college football world, and we might not be finished. Realignment may come again, but I think college football is better off when it's more region based.
Absolutely.
There's no reason to send your volleyball team out to El Paso. It's cost prohibitive. And so if you got a better travel arrangement, I think it's better for everybody. So I think it's a good fit for the Sun Belt, for Marshall, and vice versa.
Absolutely. I think the exciting thing about Marshall is, the team that we have this year is, they lost a lot of talent from last year to the draft and to the transfer portal. But some new stars have kind of, emerged. Obviously, Grant Wells is still there, a quarterback. But one guy that's kind of taken me by storm is Rasheen Ali, running back. Who it's crazy to think that he's leading the country in rushing touchdowns this year. So, but it also goes back to what Coach Huff's specialty is, and he's a running backs coach.
Yeah.
And everyone, like the best two running backs to come out of college football in the last 5 years, Saquon Barkley and Najee Harris, have both been coached by Huff. How are the players been reacting to him? Are they in favor of his energy?
Oh, I think they like it. I remember that Navy game. I was there too, and they had blocked a punt, and there was a clip of him on the sideline just elevating.
Going ice.
Like, yeah, I mean that you guys know how that is. That fires up players. They say, look at my coach out there jumping around like he's. And he did that again last week when they drew FAU offsides on a big play to get a first down and keep their drive alive. He exudes that passion, and players like that, and they feed off that. And when you talked about Ali, your friend is from Cleveland, right?
Yeah.
Ask him if he's heard of Rasheen Ali, because that's where he's from. And so
probably hasn't, knowing him.
Yeah, but
very straightforward.
Everybody asked me where he's from, and but Coach told a story. Doug Chapman actually told a story. Doug Chapman, former NFL running back, played with Chad in the late '90s and played in the NFL. Now he's on Marshall's staff, and he said Maurice Clarett came to one of their practices, former Ohio State star, and he was watching, and Ali ran past him on a run play, and Clarett looked at Chapman and goes, "Who's that? 22?" He goes, "His name's Rasheen Ali. He's the guy. He goes, he's going to play in the NFL." And he saw him on one play. The guy's got really good talent. And Adam, you might remember this, but from a running back standpoint, he's the best I've seen at Marshall since Ahmad Bradshaw as a freshman. So this is the kind of talent the guy has. But to your point, the players have all bought in, and he says if they don't, then they can play somewhere else. I mean, he's very matter of fact, but he's also the kind of guy I think the players think once you hitch your wagon to him, you go and see where you can take the program. I think people are real pleased with how he's done so far.
It's still crazy to think that Rasheen Ali is only a freshman.
Yeah,
that's the part that's crazy to me. And when I was actually at Marshall, I was teaching a bunch of the PE classes, and one of the running backs, Knowledge McDaniel, was in my one of my classes. But it's still crazy to think, that running back group, because even when Knowledge comes into the game, and Sheldon Evans, like they're still pretty deep, very productive. So I think he was perfect for the Marshall running backs crew to get one of the best running back coaches in the country, to mentor them.
Yeah, for sure. And in this day and time, as you guys know, nobody really. I mean, he is their feature back, no question. But you still have to have 3 or 4 running backs at this level, just because of the pounding they take. And that's the same situation in the NFL. You don't see guys doing what Barry Sanders did because it's just such a physical game. I thought Barry Sanders was my favorite of all time. And but just watching how you've got to come in and take your shots and then bring another guy in, because otherwise your shelf life as a running back isn't very long. You got only so many yards on those legs. So
absolutely. So Marshall started out pretty hot this year. Then they lost 3 games in a row to quality opponents, and picked it back up after those 3 losses. Now they got 3 games left this year. UAB coming up next, like we already talked about, then Charlotte, then Western Kentucky. As far as I can tell, it looks like a really good path for Marshall to make it into the conference championship game. Assuming they'll probably play against UTSA in the championship game, who I think, was it just this week? climbed into the rankings now.
Yeah. Mhm.
So how are you feeling about the rest of their season? And then, of course, if they do make it to that conference championship game, playing against UTSA, assuming that's who their opponent would be.
Well, what they've done on this little win streak they've had is they've continued to get better. Their defense has gotten better. So that's what you want. You want to see, the improvement on both sides of the ball. Special teams has been good. They had a special teams touchdown return for a touchdown against FAU. But this game is huge. UAB's obviously really good. They came in here in December last year and really said, we're going to take the championship on your field. So that's the first challenge. And then Charlotte down there, they've always been tough on their home field, and they've beaten Marshall down there a couple of times. So, coaches preach that one at a time stuff. But if they can get by UAB and then get to Charlotte, and then even if they lose to Charlotte, that game against Western is going to settle the East, assuming Western doesn't stub its toe. And they've got a tremendous quarterback. I think whoever it is going to have to go to San Antonio, and they've been really good. But I think Coach Huff has taken the tact, just keep playing well, and let's see where it ends up. And I think that's probably the best way to do it as a coach. Yeah. Instead of looking ahead, just take that game on Saturday and build off of that.
Absolutely. And you talked a little bit earlier, but like coaches have their schedules, especially with game weeks. Like Monday we got to do this, Tuesday, but this week is obviously different for Marshall. I'm always like a firm believer. I grew up as a Navy family, and so they always kind of said that Navy would always be okay if they lost every single game, but they won the last game against Army. And I always kind of felt Marshall kind of had that same mentality of we can lose every game, but we don't lose the week of the 75. We don't lose that game. What is the preparations that Coach Huff for this week has been making in comparison to the preparations for FIU or any other game they played this year?
Yeah, I don't think, Adam, that he changes the way they go about it. They'll look heavily at UAB's film, and they've got a great running back and physical defense. But what I think he said earlier was he was going to lean on his older players and kind of let them dictate the tenor. And to a person that we talked to on Tuesday, the older players would tell the younger guys, hey, you have to bring the extra juice this week on your own. This is this is why we play the games. And I am eternally in awe of how those guys do that. Remember, these guys are 21 years old, right? They weren't even thought of back when the plane crashed. So for them to gravitate to this story and to go out and play their hardest and to win that game every year, I think it's phenomenal because football, it's not a switch. You can't just turn it on and turn it off.
Right.
And they somehow for that game gear up and they get it done. And so I think he's letting the older players tell the young guys, this is what we're doing this week. And then he takes care of the preparation. And if all that comes together, then sometimes, and every time they've played this game, I think this is the 9th one, they've been able to win. So we'll see what happens Saturday because football is a funny game, but those guys bring a whole different level of energy and passion to that game.
Yeah. So one thing like this week is, it's a big game on top of, the 75 game, but this is again, the big rematch. I think when I saw the opponents of Marshall, I didn't even look at the dates. I said, UAB's coming to town. It's like, this has to be a big game. For the players that, one player in particular that really struggled last year in that conference championship game, Grant Wells, I don't think he completed a pass until the second half. I think it was one of just not a great performance. It showed his immaturity as a freshman. He's obviously a phenomenal talent. He obviously is still very young, but what do you see in Grant Wells, like his maturity, how much it's risen since, the first game against, I don't know, I remember who they played, Eastern Kentucky last year versus the team that they're about to play this week.
Yeah. Well, remember at the end of last year, they had that 3-game losing streak, and it started with a uncharacteristic, really flat loss to Rice.
Yeah.
Then lost to UAB in the championship game, and then lost in the bowl game to Buffalo. And he really didn't play well in those 3 games. So fast forward now to 2021, and he came out in that Navy game, and they, which is not an easy start.
Nope.
And they lit it up for 49 points. and he threw the ball really well. He has all the physical tools. He can throw it anywhere. He's pretty gifted as a runner. But only the mistakes that Grant makes, and he knows this, are in his head. He makes last week he made a bad pass at FAU down in the red zone, intercepted. They go down and score. Now, maybe earlier in his career that would bother him because remember he had that streak at UAB where he couldn't complete, and I think it was in his head a little bit. Mm-hmm. But they came right back and they, took back charge. He threw it long touchdown pass to Willie Johnson. I think that's the improvement you've seen in Grant is his ability to put that adversity behind him and don't worry. And Coach Huff has told him this. He goes, look, you're a gunslinger. You're going to throw some interceptions and some incompletions, but don't stop throwing it. And so when you have a coach that's like a great shooter, if you're a great shooter, I'm gonna let you shoot. That means I'm not going to take you out if you miss one or two because that's going to get in your mind. So I think that Grant has done a better job of managing games, throwing balls that are open, not taking the hero throw and seeing what you could do there. And as long as they hold on to the ball and their defense has played well, then I think that's translated to all three phases. So I think that's why they're playing better too, because each side complements the other. Absolutely.
So we mentioned it a little bit earlier. The next generation of Pennington is going to be coming to the Herd. So with the transition now going into the Sun Belt and the pedigree of Coach Huff, and just the relationship between the university and the community and how much bond they have together, what does that do for recruiting classes coming in? And do you think some of these new components, is that going to help grow recruiting for Marshall?
I think they will use it. Yeah, for sure. I mean, they can, they already do recruit the South, but they can recruit in some different areas, not DC so much, but now James Madison's in Harrisonburg, not far from DC. So they can go over there and tell a kid's mom and dad, hey, we'll come over here every year, or they'll come over to our place. Yeah. And that, that gives them a little more oomph when you're trying to get someone to sign. And so, yeah, you're in a little bit of different geographic footprint and, with Coach Huff's passion and, he was recruiter of the year when he was at Alabama. Now, he'll tell you, when you're at Alabama, do you just pick up the phone and offer? And they say, yeah, that's probably how it works. But that would be shorting his ability to recruit, because he really is a passionate guy. And he, I think everything bodes well. I think he's excited about this move, and whether it happens next year or the next year after, I don't know. But like I said, from a geographic footprint, it's good. And, the football program continues to evolve with him. Things are looking up. They've also, the basketball program's done very well under Dan D'Antoni, and the soccer program won the national championship. So there are a lot of good things going on at the university, that they can build on.
Yeah, it's an exciting time for Marshall athletics. It's just a great time to go to grad school there. Football team was top 25 in the country. Soccer team won the national championship. It was a lot of fun.
There you go.
But one thing kind of wanted to touch on some other parts of, as much as I would love to talk Marshall football for hours and hours each day, but there are other teams in the country sometimes. But one team that actually has two connections to Marshall that has been crazy good this year, or has some good wins, but the Purdue Boilermakers. And I remember I was talking to some of my friends, and they jokingly said, whoever the Purdue defensive coordinator is, he needs a head coaching job immediately. And for people who don't know, it was the former defensive coordinator at Marshall. But how's it? What you got to interact with? I'm assuming you interacted with Brad Lambert at some point. But when you see like these other players that kind of go off to other schools and other coaches, Brock Thompson's at Purdue. Forget the name, but he's at Notre Dame. Right now,
Kane Madden, offensive lineman.
Yeah, him. When you see these other guys going to kind of like other schools, but like and still succeeding, what is that kind of? Do you still feel proud, or do you still feel kind of sad that they're still not wearing that Marshall green?
Oh no, I think in this day of age of transfer portal stuff, you're just going to see that more and more often. And I'm not saying I'm not the greatest proponent of it, but. Kane Madden got an offer to play at Notre Dame. I mean, that's pretty heady stuff. Yeah. So, and he was an All-American at Marshall, so it wasn't like he was unknown here. So he gets to go over there, and then Brad Lambert was a candidate for the job when Coach Huff got it. And I've known Brad since he was on Jim Donnan's staff. He came with Jim Donnan, and Brad's a fantastic guy. Really good coach. Coach Marshall's defense last year, and I believe they gave up 12 points a game, which led the nation.
Phenomenal.
So he knows how to coach, and he did well down at Charlotte as a startup program. They threw him into the mix really quickly because they went from non-scholarship to Division I in a span of 6-7 years. So, but Brad's done really well, and to see these guys succeed elsewhere. I mean, I just one thing I do know is when coaches do come back that have been here before. Shannon Morrison's on the staff. He was on the staff previously, and even the ones who leave and go elsewhere, they always remark that this is a special place. And I think great coaches don't take jobs and say, I'm taking this to see what my next job's going to be. They coach their what's off wherever they are, as you should do at any job, and whatever happens from there happens. And I think that's what great coaches are made of, the ability to be at a place, do the best you can. If you send them into the stratosphere, that's awesome, and you go get your own head coaching job, that's cool too. It's a small fraternity, so it's neat to see all those coaches and players succeed, and that's at any place, that's at any team. I have a great love for college football, and to see players succeed and make something out of themselves is really the reason why we do this job, because you get to see those successes.
Absolutely. One thing I just kind of realized is, I've always been a big proponent of the G5. I love it obviously because of Marshall. Right now, I can feel like all the G5 schools are all Cincinnati fans right now. We're all rooting for Cincinnati, but they're undefeated. They've done everything they've been asked to do, but they're still, as of right now, outside of the college football playoff. But what are your kind of thoughts on the message that the committee said to Cincinnati and to truly every G5 school minus Notre Dame, what the message they sent?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, to be really frank with you, I think they botched it up from the get-go this year, and they're trying to cover their tracks a little bit. But to have Cincinnati number 6, I mean, there aren't very many better wins than going to beat Notre Dame at Notre Dame, and that's what Cincinnati did. Now, have they struggled a little bit? Yeah, but the part of this that bothers me the most is, if you look at the teams from the American that were ranked in the AP top 25, none of those teams except Cincinnati was ranked in the top 25 of the college football playoff rankings. So the criticism then becomes, oh, well, they don't have any top 25 wins in their league. That's because you didn't rank anybody in their league in the top 25. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy for the playoff committee to say, oh, they didn't play a top 25 team. No, because you didn't give the teams in their league their just due. So that's why the thing's kind of, to me, it's slanted. I'm not saying that Cincinnati can run in there and beat Alabama, but why not give it a shot? They gave Georgia all they wanted last year, right? And they've got an NFL quarterback, or a potential NFL quarterback. Their defense has been lights out, just to assign a G5 school by saying you don't play enough good competition is not a reason to exclude them from the playoffs. And college football, I've said this and I've railed on this for years, is the only sport in college where every team in the country doesn't have an avenue to get to the national title. You do in basketball, you do in soccer, you do in baseball, you do in every other sport, but not football. So they have to rectify that and just give an avenue. If the playoffs are 12 and a group of 5 team is guaranteed, then at least you have a chance. Right now you don't, and that's not fair. So that's my take.
Yeah, I like that. It just seems like there's too many barriers in place right now to prevent G5 schools from getting that rank to make it into the playoffs right now, because each individual conference has their own structure and regulations as far as who their opponents can be outside of that conference, and that makes it difficult to have that strength of schedule to climb the rankings or to get that recognition. So
exactly,
and I think that's one of the big reasons why a larger playoff structure would be better.
Yeah, and you guys read Twitter and you see all the upshot from these rankings. I mean, this just isn't group of 5, media people or coaches or players complain. This is across the country where people are just going, "Come on, man, you got to get serious." And so they're getting a lot of flack, and deservedly so. Head to head seems to not matter now. Michigan State and Michigan. I mean, I don't get it. But there are a lot more rankings left to go, and if Cincinnati takes care of business, they're going to have a hard time keeping them out. I do know that. So
right. Yep, absolutely.
Alabama's still there.
Yeah.
Alabama's still there, and 2-loss to Alabama. At this point, the fact that a loss to an unranked Texas A&M team makes them the second best team in the country doesn't sit well. Just as a fan of college football, not even a fan of the G5, just as a fan of college football, to see Bama right there. I know I shouldn't say that because Coach Huff probably still has players there and he likes people, but I don't like Bama.
It's like a few years. It's not just Group of Five. I mean, Big 12. I think it was several years ago. I believe TCU was 4th, and they beat somebody 55-3, and they dropped to 5th in the college football playoff rankings. And the Big 12 didn't get a team in. It's like, how do you beat somebody by 52 points and you drop a spot?
Yeah.
I mean, it's you can look at examples every year, and it's I don't know what they talk about in there, but sometimes it ain't football, I don't think.
Speaking of Big 12, just your personal opinion, Keith, and especially comparing to Cincinnati's ranking being an undefeated team, how do you feel about where Oklahoma ended up with their undefeated record, and they're still at 8th now?
Yeah, I mean, they've won close ones, right? They're not the normal Oklahoma juggernaut, and they've had the Spencer Rattler issues, and but one thing I tell people all the time. It's so hard to go undefeated in NFL, college, high school, name it. It's really, really hard. So if you do, and if you are, you should be afforded and accorded the honors that come with it, because there's a reason why there aren't that many at the end of the year. Maybe one, sometimes none. So it's phenomenally difficult to run the table. And I think you should get extra points for that. No matter who you're playing, no matter what the margin of victory is, you've beaten who you lined up against every Saturday. And that should be probably of more weight than anything else you've done.
Absolutely. And I think the most famous undefeated team at the moment, the team that we're kind of all talking about, is obviously the Georgia Bulldogs.
Yeah.
And it's just phenomenal, the talent that I've seen from them. I keep saying their defense. We're not watching a college defense. We're watching an NFL caliber defense. And I've started watching Georgia a lot because someone I went to high school with was on that Georgia Bulldogs team. And but right now, do you see at this point right now, if the playoffs were to start today, is Georgia winning the national championship?
I mean, if you ask me to take Georgia against the house, I would take Georgia. I mean, just what they've done in that league to play that kind of defense, week in and week out, that's otherworldly. I saw somebody had a great line. They said, rank Georgia number 1 and leave the next 3 spots blank, because that's how far ahead of everybody they are right now. I mean, they've just done so well, and they've got all the tools. And when you got a defense like that, man, you can score 15 points a game and win. So they deserve all the praise they get this year for sure.
Absolutely. And another prediction kind of thing is, this is the first time in a while that I'm sitting towards the second half of the year not knowing who's going to win the Heisman. I really have zero clue. I actually got the UNC Pitt game on, and the person I thought who was the favorite is currently 4th in the Vegas odds, and Matt Corral. But if the season ends right now, who would you think is the Heisman Trophy winner?
Man, the Michigan State running back's phenomenal. Personally, I've seen Corral play 2 or 3 times, and I really, really am impressed with him. And I have never been one of these guys that say you has to be the best player on the best team. The award goes to the most outstanding player in America.
Right.
And that shouldn't preclude you from being on a team. And Mississippi's a good team. I mean, Ole Miss is good. So I don't think that should rule you out. Unfortunately, that's how the vote usually happens. And I have a vote. And I just look at the best player. I mean, I voted for Larry Fitzgerald when he was at Pitt. I thought he was the best player in the country. And because he played receiver, he wasn't going to win. But I thought he was. So I think there's a certain preconceived notion of who you can vote for, and that they have to be a quarterback and they have to be on the number 1 team. I throw all that stuff out. So, but I'm like you. It's a mixed bag right now. It's anybody's game.
Absolutely, it's creating excitement for the second half of the year, especially when we're getting into rivalry time and conference championship time. It's really when the leaders and the best players start to emerge, and even players that we weren't talking about at the start of the year. C.J. Stroud, who really struggled. He's flown up the charts. But even some other guys, Kenneth Walker, 5 touchdown game. That's itself is just remarkable. So it's an exciting, second half of college football, and I'm super excited to see where it takes it.
Always remember November, guys. That's what they say.
Absolutely, man.
Yep.
Well, Keith, it has been an absolute honor to have you on the show. Just to hear your story of, the plane crash 51 years ago, and just your expertise on, Marshall and, college football. So thank you so much.
Hey, man. Thank you, Adam. And thank you for having me, Jerred. It was a lot of fun, and I appreciate your all's passion for the game. It's a great game, and I hope we don't screw it up. Just let the game be the game, and have the adults kind of stay out of it. Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. But thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Keith. We appreciate it.
All right.
Absolutely. Hey, for everyone here at the Cut, we have a lot of great shows here. We have the DFS Dive tomorrow at 5:00 with those three guys. Christian and Randy will be back next week after Christian's little vacation. Unfortunately, he didn't invite us. Kind of rude, but I'll talk with him later about that. They'll have, the Coach Approach will be back next week, and a lot of fun stuff. And obviously, every Thursday, Jerred and I will be back for the College Football Cut. But for Jerred and for Keith, we will be back next week. Thank you guys all for joining. And as always, go Herd.
Thanks, fellas.
Thanks, everyone.